now I'd like to introduce our speaker for tonight, Professor Ian McCarthy. Ian is the Associate Dean, and his responsibility is the Segal Graduate School. He's also a very fine researcher and teacher. He's a professor and the Canada Research Chair in Management of Technology and Operations. He's also the director of the CMA Innovation Centre at Beedie and a member of Canada's Research Council Grants Selection Committee. His research and teaching focuses on how firms should be designed and managed as to succeed with different business models. So how do you move from one business model to another using governance principles and structural principles? Ian is also something of a celebrity on social media, an academic celebrity. Using his Twitter handle, which is somewhat obscure, it's called @ToffeeMan68. It's not called @Ian McCarthy, but there you go. It's a historical artifact. He frequently tweets about his research, about technology, and even on occasion, and probably more than even on occasion, he tweets about the fortunes of his soccer team, Everton. He's been named along Arianna Huffington, Deepak Chopra, and Sir Richard Branson on Business Insider's prestigious list of 54 smart thinkers everyone should follow on Twitter. So if you aren't following him on Twitter already, you might want to check him out. Tonight he'll be speaking about gamification, specifically what it is and how it can be used in business. Given my own practitioner and research background in technology, I'm really looking forward to it. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Ian McCarthy.
So welcome everybody, pleasure to be here. When Kirk asked me if I would be interested in giving a talk tonight, one of the things that's quite scary about doing it is because many of you I've already taught in various classes, and so I'm thinking, well, you don't want to come back and hear something that was touched on or covered in detail in a class. So I use this as an opportunity to talk about something I've never talked about before, but something I have been studying, but I've never done a talk. So this is completely new. So a little bit of background. This is completely new. It's based on research which has been going on for almost 2 years, and it's with colleagues here, and it spans 3 sort of areas: marketing, MIS, and operations. Leyland Pitt is one of the co-authors of this work, so is Jan Keatsman. Leyland's a professor of marketing, Jan is a professor of MIS, and I'm a professor of technology and operations. And so I'm interested in control. I'm interested in how you control people to extract value out of them. Leyland's interested in how you actually capture value out of them in terms of marketing, and Jan is about how you use technology to do that. We also have 2 fantastic doctoral students who really helped lead this and drive this. Karen Robson, who's here, and Kirk Planner, and I want to acknowledge them and say thank you to them. What I'm hoping to do is understand what gamification is. Gamification is a term that have really emerged in about 2010. But when you look at what it is, people have been gamifying things forever, okay? So why did the term emerge, and what's the value of this term and this phenomena and this interest? And I'm going to talk about that. What does gamification do? And what myself and Leyland and Jan and Karen and Kirk did was we studied lots of companies of examples that had gamified marketing processes, recruitment processes, training processes, behavior adjusting processes, and we tried to understand what they did and why they did it. And by doing that, and then also looking at the sort of computer game industry, which is, you know, a science in its own right because it's so big in terms of they want to design engaging games, we identified these components of a framework for helping you think about gamification. I want to introduce that. I have 2 major examples that I draw on all the way through. I mentioned a number of examples, but one is Jay-Z and Decoded, and the other one is American Idol. And at the end, we finish with some takeaways, and then we have a quiz. So, what is gamification? So, when you think of the word game, you maybe think of hockey, soccer, Monopoly, poker, mastermind, all sorts of things. And when we unpack a definition of a game, it's a physical or mental activity which has a competitive component to it, has rules, and people do it often for pleasure. Most people volunteer to do it. That's a key component. They volunteer to do it for pleasure. And there could be all sorts of things which give rise to that pleasure, all sorts of different rewards and motives, but they do it for pleasure. I'd like you to think about the expression, I'm game. I'm game generally means I'm eager and willing to do something, often something new. And so when you think about I'm game and I'm willing to do something new, this is a sort of engagement, it's motivation. It's about how we actually get people to do things. Remember, I'm interested in how you control people. How you control people to get different behaviors and different outcomes. And so how do you control people to make them eager and willing? And so this notion I'm game and the definition of a game are sort of the building blocks of what gamification is. Gamification is not about creating games. Okay? It's not about creating games. It's about learning from the world of gaming, which is a big industry. It's been around for a long time. And learning about the psychology and the behavioral economics which go in there, and why they get such fantastic levels of engagement, why so many people around the world play games and do games, and how can you learn from that to change the behaviors of employees, customers, members of the public, prisoners, patients, whatever you're trying to actually control. So it's not about making a game. It's about gamifying non-business situations, okay? Processes, experiences that happen in various industries, private, public, whatever they are. So I've got a couple of examples just to prove that we have been gamifying for a long time, we just haven't been calling it gamification. This first one is a personal one. I actually owned this album in 1978. This is a Panini soccer book. The first one came out in 1970 for the Mexico World Cup. And the Panini family have been bringing them out ever since, and there's the cards at the bottom for the most recent World Cup in Brazil. The books cost about $10. And they have pages of teams in them, and they have spaces where you would put pictures, these stickers of players. And the books have about 620 odd empty spaces, and the book costs $10. And a pack of cards, you get 5 cards in a pack. A pack costs $2. How much money will you spend completing that book? Have a guess. 5 cards in a pack, $2 a pack, 620 spaces. $1,800. So when your child comes home and says, I've bought this book for $10 and you want to complete it, assuming that they don't do any sort of trading on eBay or any other form of trading, they just buy. They have to buy about 900 packs of cards to do this. And it's called the coupon collector's problem. Okay, because you buy the first book, it's empty, you buy the first 2 or 3 packs, and guess what? The cards always go in, there's always spaces for them. But as you fill up the spaces, it becomes harder and harder to complete the book. And this is not just a sort of a nice, interesting economics problem. It actually leads to gamification behavior because you then trade. Kids trade. I used to trade. I'd have lots and lots of duplicates, and I'd be wanting, some player from Spain to complete the Spanish team, and you go in and you trade 20 cards. And it was all done in the physical environment, which was the playground, the school playground. Now it's done online, and people trade, and it leads to lots of gaming in terms of trying to collect it. And so this is, started in 1970. Anyone know what these are? Anyone remember these? Green Shield stamps. Green Shield stamps. So when you bought things at supermarkets and various places, as a reward for shopping at certain stores, they gave you these stamps. And you would collect enough of these stamps, and then there was a catalog, a sort of mail order delivery company called Sperry and Hutchinson. And for so many stamps, you could trade in. And so it was a way of rewarding you for shopping at certain stores. You get stamps, and then you would exchange those stamps. And so this started in the 1930s. Okay, 1930s, stopped in about the 1990s. Just to give you an example of how big it was, in the 1960s, Sperry and Hutchinson produced and issued more stamps in the US than the US Postal Service did. So that's how big a phenomenon it was. And so this is, again, not new in terms of, it wasn't called gamification at the time. We'll come on to why it's called gamification and how we can potentially learn. And then we have in 1981, American Airlines gives us the frequent flyer program. One of the big changes here is technology. We have IT to track travelers, to use their data, and we reward it. And even today, American Airlines is well regarded for its technology it has in its frequent flyer programs and stuff. So these are examples that all emerged long before the word gamification was even invented. So what is gamification? So it comes out in about 2010, and people start looking, and again, it's emerged because of technological developments, but other reasons too. And so this is an advert for Tipp-Ex, and Tipp-Ex is a dyeing product. Okay, Tipp-Ex is a dyeing product in terms of it's a corrective fluid, so when you used to type and when you used to write in ink, and do your homework and your assignments, all handwritten, and you needed to correct it, you would use this corrective fluid or tape. And what happens here is that these two hunters are camping, and a bear comes out. You can just see the bear by the tent. And they go into a panic, and they say, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And the hunter who's holding the camera and is filming it says to his colleague here, kill the bear, shoot the bear, shoot the bear. And he's just about to shoot the bear, and he stops. His hand comes out of the screen. He grabs the Tipp-Ex, and he whitens out the word shoots, and then it turns into a text box. And it turns into a text box, and you can put whatever verb you want in there. And they made about 400 different endings to this video. Okay, and so you could put a hunter plays soccer with the bear, a hunter dances with a bear, a hunter makes love to the bear. There was even a hunter makes love to the bear, a hunter has dinner with the bear, a hunter goes to school with the bear. And this was a phenomenally successful video because it was interactive and people wanted to experiment and push the limits and see how naughty can this get and what's the different things it can do. And within like 2 weeks, it had 9 million views in 2010. And in the campaign alone, it had 50 million views. And this was launched for school children. This was a back-to-school product, okay? A back-to-school product. And for a dying product, in that campaign, sales went up 30%. Anyone know this gentleman? Jay-Z, I mentioned him earlier, Sean Carter. So he ousted Elvis. Elvis did hold the record for having the greatest number of #1 albums. He has 11 #1 albums. He's also a very successful businessman and entrepreneur in terms of sports agency, entertainment, fashion, nightclubs, a whole range of things. Also in 2010, he launched his book, his memoirs, called Jay-Z Decoded. And he approached Droba 5, an advertising agency in New York, and said, I want to have a really interesting, engaging book launch. And he also managed to bring in Bing, which is Microsoft's search engine, because they were looking to try and promote Bing. They were trying to actually make people use Bing, and in terms of doing things. And so what they did, what they worked out together was that the month before the book launch, they were going to release a page of a book at a time. And they were going to release them in 200 cities 200 locations around the world. And they were going to release them in a way that you would go looking for them. It was going to be a scavenger hunt. And you would look online, either using Bing's map system, okay, where you could look in line and see where they were, or physically walk around. And this is a game that you played online and in the physical world, and you went around and you collected the information and you built up the book and you shared it. But this is how they posted it. This is how they posted the pages. So this was posted on a Cadillac in a neighborhood in New York, which was deemed to be the origins of hip hop. Okay? And the Cadillac is part there. And that page represents the context of Jay-Z's life when he's talking about learning about the origins of hip-hop. This is where Jay-Z grew up. This is the sort of Marcy Projects in New York. And this is the building he grew up. And they put like a heritage plaque there in his honor, but it actually has text from the book. It refers to a page of a book. This is a nightclub a hotel in Miami, the Delano Hotel. And on the bottom of the swimming pool, they put a page of his book. the restaurant that he liked, his favorite burger restaurant. And so what he's doing is unpacking his life in the real world and on the online world. And people around the world are scavenging and sharing and using Bing's technology to try and find and complete the book. And the book's only going to be launched. And there's also prizes. Every time the first person to find a page of the book gets a prize. Some of the prizes were quite significant, but everyone got a signed page of the book in terms of doing things. Some of them got the items they found. So some of them eventually would get that and get to keep that eventually afterwards and going forward. Gucci even made a jacket and put it in their stores, which had pages of his book in terms of when he became rich and started splashing the money and would get into Gucci in terms of doing things and working for Gucci. And so it went on. So when you look at this, the player engagement was extremely high. When you look at the number of minutes the average player spent on the Bing website, it was fairly significant. His Facebook fans grew by 1 million in that month alone. And then the book went on to have a position on the bestsellers list for 19 consecutive weeks. But most importantly, the campaign earned 1.1 billion global media impressions in just 1 month. And he paid nothing for it, because he convinced Bing to pay everything for it. He said Bing was more desperate to raise their profile and their game and their technology. They wanted his demographic. The campaign cost $2 million, and Bing paid for every bit of it. And so Dropper, Five, and Jay-Z did very well out of it. So why gamification? So at the same time, these were called gamification examples in terms of making things engaging, trying to get people to explore, hunt. There's rewards. I'll talk about this. But why gamification? Why has that term come about? And I want to say these slides, the papers, they're all available. Just email me, email Kirk, and so I see people taking photographs. If you want copies of the slides, I'll put them on SlideShare, and you can download them and make me look popular by downloading it. So 3 things gave rise to the gamification. 1, the growth of the computer industry. Okay? 1, the growth of the computer. It's a $30 billion industry. It's a $30 billion industry. 50% of North Americans play games of some form, and I'm going to give some more details in terms of the average gamer. Who here plays computer games? So the average age of a gamer is about in low 30s, 31. 70% of gamers are over the age of 19. They're not young gentlemen like they are in this picture. There's a much larger population of gamers above their age. The second thing was the sort of pervasiveness of technology, our cell phones, in terms of being able to collect information, to control us, to share. We have more gaming technology than we do in our pockets than we did like 10 years ago in our houses. But this last one is the quest to try and get that reaction. If you're a parent or a teacher, you would love to get that level of concentration. Look at their eyes, look at their eyes, look at the smiles on their faces, okay? And so what the quest is there's this $30 billion industry, and look at what's going on in those eyes. Look at the concentration, look at the smiles, look at the intensity, what's going on. Anyone know what this is from, where this is from? Call of Duty. Which Modern Warfare 3. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3. The Call of Duty franchise itself is itself worth about $30 billion. It started on computers in terms of going forward. The franchise in terms of what it's sold in the last 12, 13 years is about $30 billion. Modern Warfare 3, in its first 5 days, 775 million, bigger than any movie, bigger than Avatar in terms of sales. Modern Warfare 3, 1,900 years of playing time every day. Every day. Okay? 40 million people play Modern Warfare every day. Okay? 40 million people play Call of Duty every day, or its various versions. If you look at all of Call of Duty releases, 25 billion hours, or over 2.85 million years of playtime. Okay? Now you may remember that Malcolm Gladwell brought a book out called Outliers. He wanted to study what made geniuses and success, what made the Beatles, what made Bill Gates, what made Mozart. And to summarize his findings, he said that they weren't born geniuses, they weren't born with talent, they practiced a lot. They practiced a lot, they were lucky, they had some breaks, but they practiced a lot. And so Malcolm Gladwell draws on sort of science and research. And within sort of education and psychology, there is this thing known as the 10,000 hour rule. Okay, the 10,000 hour rule. So Tiger Woods, by the time he was like 17, had played 10,000 hours of golf. Okay? Now you look at how often you drive every day. From the age of 17, most of us have to get into our late 40s to get 10,000 hours of driving time in a car. But geniuses, talented individuals, they escalate, they do it in a smart, purposeful way. Well, Activision, the maker of Call of Duty, they know that there are, in countries, hundreds of thousands of people in countries, millions around the world, who have 10,000 hours of playing time on these games. 10,000 hours. So they have allocated so much time, not to their MBA studies, not to their math, not to sport, but in terms of these reactions. And just recently, just at the weekend, we had the World Championship of Call of Duty. And I want you to look at the reactions. These are men mostly in their mid to late 20s, and look at the audience. And this is what's made businesses wonder what's going on here. How can we get all these playing times and get these reactions?
We're going for the #1 title, and we're not going to stop.
We're the best team here. We're going to win this.
We're going to make it to tomorrow, I promise you guys.
The biggest tournament of the year.
He's up there as some of the best in the world. It's going to be interesting.
These guys devote
$1 million in prizes,
It's right
and the
here,
tournament was at the
right
weekend.
now.
They have waited a year for this moment.
So guys, let's get this started.
Use that extra ability to jump out.
Awesome gameplay. Staying so accurate with that rifle. Lights it up with a headshot.
32 teams from around the world, 6 continents.
One team will leave as world champion. One more game.
Nicely done from him. That's 2 kills in quick succession.
Big deal. And that is a 6.
Something a little different. Stuff doesn't have one. Has a big one. He's got a big not gonna happen. Ace is gonna clean it up.
So the team that won was called Denial Esports, and this was in LA, and they just won on Sunday. They won $400,000. That was the winning prize. It was $1 million in prize money. So the reason why the word gamification came about was people started really waking up, because this industry also spends a lot of money on trying to work out what is a legendary game, what is a top-selling game. And when you look at what's going on, and when you look at the psychology behind it and the behavioral economics, it's because there are rewards. There is $1 million prize. But the reason why they spent 10,000 hours becoming the winning team was because of intrinsic motivations. Okay? Because the activity they're doing is about competence building. It's about mastery over some sort of task. There's problem solving involved, and they get frequent feedback. Okay, feedback in terms of. So one of the reasons why I do lots of tweeting and social media is because I get feedback. I live in a world where it takes 3 years to write a paper. It's long and lonely, and if it wasn't for great colleagues like Leyland. But every day when I tweet, people give me feedback. There's like conversations. I don't have to wait through. It's like developing a pharmaceutical drug. It takes 10 years to wait, and when it comes out, all they do is beat it up and destroy it in terms of say why it doesn't work. And so tweeting is what keeps me sane, because I get feedback every day about little snippets of information that are put out there. There's also autonomy. It's player-centered. People volunteer to do this. They do it because they want to. There's lots of experimentation because you can die many times in these games. There's all stats on the average time that people have died. You can crash cars, you can smash things up, you can experiment because you want to be competent at it in terms of doing things. You can also customize it. You can customize it in terms of names, in terms of imagery, in terms of music. And there's a sense of purpose, in terms of goals. People know what they're trying to do. There's projects which people work on together, and it's become much more social in terms of online gaming. And so when we look at these are the fundamental building blocks of intrinsic motivation. And while rewards and incentives do have value, they do have value in terms of directing behavior, they also have limitations. Okay? And we know that intrinsic motivation is more enduring, it's more lasting, and that if you're only really interested in sort of incentives and rewards, you're either a finance professor or an economist in terms of doing this. But if you like playing for the sake of playing, and you like learning in terms of doing this, and escalating and getting better and working out how you get better, then you don't really care until you get to being elites, until you get near the rewards and near the fame. The reason why these individuals spend many thousands of hours doing it is because they just like it. They like it because of those building blocks. So when we were studying the various examples, and we talk about the Jay-Z example, we talk about a number of examples, including the Tipex example, but a whole range of them, there are different participants in any gamified process. There's the designer, there's the players, there's the spectators, and the observers. And they have different roles. The designers would be the manager, the person who's wanting to gamify, wanting to control people, control customers, control patients. The players are the people who are being controlled. And they play in this because they want to experience it, and they don't mind being controlled. Spectators are people who are present, possibly, viewing what's going on, but can influence it. And observers are people who are viewing it, but can't influence it. So let me give an example, and I will draw upon something that I know a lot about. So if you want to change the rules of soccer, you have to talk to this gentleman in his organization. You have to talk to Sepp Blatter. If you want to make the goals bigger, want to make the pitches smaller, if you want to get the referees to spray those lines on the pitches and everything else, that all needs to be approved by FIFA and Sepp Blatter. So he's the designer. He's the designer of the game soccer at the moment. He's not the inventor of it, but he's the designer of it. This gentleman here, kicking the ball, probably one of the best left backs in the world, playing for definitely the best team in the world, Everton Soccer Club, in terms of, his name is Leighton Baines. Don't forget that name, Leighton Baines, okay? He's a player. He's a player in the game. He's following the rules, but there are lots of different players. He's a professional player. I play. People play for fun. People play for exercise. People play for money. People play for different reasons. And there are different types of players in games and in gamified processes. This is a spectator, okay? He's also an Everton fan. And he is a spectator rather than an observer because he has the potential to influence the game. So what do you think he's doing here? Could be yelling at the ref. He could be yelling at the opposition, or he could be cheering his own team. He's trying to influence the outcome by positively, cheering on his own team, telling the referee that that was a bad decision, ref, and chanting at him in bad words, or he's trying to make the opposition feel inferior. Now, escalate that up to 50,000 fans. You get a sense of how they can influence. And in soccer, most home stadiums refer to their fans as the 12th man, the 12th player, in terms of doing this, because they can influence it. And then when you look at the TV viewing observer, only an observer because they can't influence the game, but maybe 10 years from now they can. Maybe 10 years from now we have polling devices where they vote who should be on the field, who should be substituted. We have that technology. I'm going to talk about American Idol in a bit in terms of doing things, and you can vote who stays on, who gets substituted, but at the moment they can't, so they're just observers, not because they're not there, but because they're not influencing the game. They don't have the ability to influence the game. We also know that there's different types of players. And one of the things we did when we looked at all the different examples, we said players can vary in terms of their competitiveness and in terms of their orientation. And when you look at this, you will see yourself on there somewhere. You might see yourself on there for all games that you play. Some of you, everything you have to slay. Everything, okay, in terms of doing things. Some of you, there's only some things that you like to slay in terms of doing. Other things, you do it for social reasons. Or you do it for learning reasons. Or you do it for personal development reasons. But all of us will be on there in some way in terms of the actual physical, cognitive, and business games that we play in terms of doing this, and we'll be on different positions. And so this is important because how you actually interact with these individuals varies. So the gamification principles that we sort of identified by one, looking at what is gamified, and then looking at what was going on in the sort of computer game industry, were these three sort of elements of a gamified process. One is the mechanics, second one is the dynamics, and the third one is the emotions. And so go back to the video game competition. Look at the emotions that go on in terms of emotions are very important. And these interact to produce a gamified experience. And so the mechanics are, how do you set up the game? What are the rules? Where is it held? What is the temporal clock involved? The dynamics are the strategies. And so remember, the strategies will vary depending on what sort of player you are in terms of doing it. And different slayers will have different strategies to win, and different socialites will have different strategies to actually capture social value from it in terms of doing. But we have different dynamics going on. And then we have the emotions, the player's state of mind. So, and within mechanics, we have three types of mechanics: setup mechanics, rule mechanics, and progression mechanics. So I'm going to switch between games and gamified experiences. So here is a game of poker. And so when you look at the mechanics, it talks about how poker is set up. And so the setup mechanics is where, is it played online, which it can be, or is it played in the physical world, at a casino, at a home? Where is it played? What do you need to make it happen? What are the objects, the cards, the chips, the table? How are these distributed? How much is allocated? What is the buy-in? What is the number of players? And so look at people who've taken real-world poker playing and put it online, and look at how they've adapted it to have different rules and different contexts. In poker, we have the rule mechanics then, and all games we have rule mechanics, which they basically shape the concept of the goal, which here is to win, but how do you win? Is it last person standing? Is it the person with the biggest chip pile at a certain time? For those of you who may play poker, poker is an endurance sport. You know, it's much more endurance than Ironman running or marathon running and stuff and everything else. You know, you have to stay awake for days on end in terms of actually winning. It is an endurance sport. But online poker can be sped up. The mechanics, the temporal mechanics, are all changed so that you can get through and play a game of poker in an evening in a tournament version. Then you've got the progression mechanics, which is typically badges, trophies, winnings, but here it would be the largest pile of chips. And so we know that's how games are designed. And how you design them to produce different dynamics is important. Does it allow you to produce dynamics? So in poker, you know, there are different strategies. Whether you try... Poker is often a game of deception. You try to deceive people. You try to deceive people that you have a good hand when you have a crap hand. That's called bluffing. Or you try to deceive them that you have a weak hand when you really have pocket aces, and that's called limping in or slow betting in terms of doing this. And so there are strategies there. There are also strategies in terms of how you bet. I mean, there's a whole science behind this in terms of how you bet. Are you an aggressive bettor or a passive bettor? Or how many times do you start? You only start when you've got a strong hand, and so therefore you're a tight player, or will you just play all the time because you're a loose player? Now, social players, we know, if you're in that quadrant, social players are loose because they just want to play for the fun of it and want to learn, and they'll go in and they'll be very, very loose. And slayers who want to win will be tight because they only want to win in terms of doing this. But good slayers will also know. So for instance, when I play, I'm typically a tag. Okay, and a tag will give you the biggest earnings, but you have to know that if you're only a tag, then people know you're a tag, and then they will know, and you can't deceive people. So you have to move around. You have to. This is why it's called dynamics, because you have to move around and pretend sometimes that you're a rock or a lag or a calling station in terms of betting patterns. But ultimately, with poker, my strategy is to die slowly, and wait for the big hands to kill big, in terms of doing things. And so I tend to spend most of my time there, but I do have to move around because then people know that if Ian's in, he's only in because he's got good hands, because it's a game of deception. And then we have emotions. And in poker, it's quite important because you try to hide your emotions and hide your tails, because particularly during the playing. Once you've won, you can reveal, but during the actual the betting and the dealing and the progression of the game, you try to actually hide it because these are big tails. So how does this MDE apply to a non-game context? So I want to talk about a TV show, an entertainment process, but it's also a recruitment process. So American Idol from 2003 to 2011 was the #1 ranked TV show in the world, in the US. Had 345 chart-topping songs out in terms of doing things. Simon Fuller is the designer of it, and his organization and his agency. And this is a very, very powerful, so this is in the US, and when people vote, 120 million people vote out of the US population. That's far greater than people vote for the president of the United States in terms of 120 million people voted in, I think, season 11 of American Idol. And it has very, very powerful forms of engagement and very powerful forms of, very powerful dynamics. So you've got the participants, you've got Simon Fuller, 19 Entertainment, you've got the contestants who are the players, then you've got the spectators, which is anyone who can vote, and the judges, in terms of anyone who can influence the outcome of the game, but not actually partaking in it. And then you've got the observers, which are the non-participating viewers, and they're only non-participating and they're not voting. They're not voting and trying to share the outcome. When you look at the setup mechanics, it's set up online, it's set up in the physical world, there's auditions, in terms of trying to select people. They have very, very strict rules on who can actually play. So there's a certain age group, you have to be a US citizen, you can't have any contracts already with any sort of talent organization of any sort, because this is and if you do, then you have to waive them if you want to actually enter the process. It has a temporal clock, it's once a week for an average of 10 weeks. And the contestants have to compete against each other. And they're given certain tasks in terms of performing songs, either in groups, either individually, but they're given tasks. And really, it's a game of survival. Okay, it's a game of survival and winning. They do have to collaborate on duets and group performances, but it's a game of survival. When you look at Simon Fuller, also, the control here is very, very, very strong. So once you sign up, and once you go to any of the auditions, if you get accepted and progress into the tournament, you don't just sign away all of your music rights. You sign away your image rights, your film rights, your book rights. Every recording that they do of you, they can reproduce as is, or with various forms of likeness, and you cannot do anything about it. So it's known for having excessive control over all the people who play in it. It's also known that that the producers also plant ringers. They plant people who are deliberately bad for entertainment purposes that are playing the game, and they also plant people who are professionals, but they take away from the contract. So it's not always homegrown talent. It's a contrived game. It's a controlled game. But one of the most amazing things is the strong spectator dynamics. When you look at it, there is a strong gender bias. So who's more likely to get voted off, a female or a male? How many say male? How many say female? When you look at the audience demographics, it's largely females. and they tend to vote off the females and keep the males on. And that manifests in terms of dynamics. Okay? And then there's a north-south divide as well in the country. But because the dynamics are so strong, there are all sorts of innovations and rule breaking that go on. So there are power voters. People invented technology that with a touch of a button on your cell phone, you could make 10,000 votes with one touch of a button in terms of doing things. And when power voting came in, it meant that AT&T and other service providers ended up dropping hundreds of millions of calls because they couldn't handle the phone calling capacity of all these power voters in terms of doing this. And then there was a whole group of individuals who said, well, this is a very interesting game, but we want to mess it up. And so they started power voting and text calling, but they wanted to vote for the worst person. So if there was 10 contestants and one of them was the worst, then they wanted to try and keep the worst contestant in the show the longest by manipulating it. And it was called the worst voting campaign. And it was, and so there's all sorts of interesting gaming going on. The game is being gamed. The gamified experience is being gamed. And so this is another example because when you look at all the engagement numbers, when you look at the business numbers, when you look at the time people spend, it's very similar to Call of Duty and Modern Warfare in terms of being a success, in terms of what it's achieved. When you look at the emotions, juicy feedback is a term used in computer games. It's not used you design things where you get juicy feedback, so you get exciting, real-time, often feedback. Imagine American Idol with no judges. Imagine American Idol with no, ex-singers and ex-entertainers who are sitting there commenting. Imagine that feedback's not there, and you were just watching it and you voted. Would it have the same dynamics? Would it have the same emotions? The video clip I was showing earlier was when you look at the emotions, this is somebody who lost. This was a female who got voted off, and everyone was stunned why she got voted off. And again, this is a show.
Here we go. Jacob, you had said if America put you in the bottom 3, it wouldn't be because of your vocal ability, but because they couldn't look themselves in the mirror. I can tell you now, Jacob, that you will be leaving us and going to safety on the couches. You are safe, Jacob.
So there are hundreds of millions of people at home with the same reactions. The same reactions.
Congratulations.
Positive, joy, pleasure for this young man who's survived.
And now the final result. The person who leaves us tonight after the nationwide vote is Pia. Stefano, you are safe. You are safe.
So imagine if you could engage your employees this way. Imagine if you could engage your students this way. Imagine if you engage your customers this way.
What a shock. What a surprise.
So we have juicy feedback. Juicy feedback in terms of games is important, is that you get exciting, engaging feedback. It's built into it. But we also have what's called on the rails, which you feel that you have complete autonomy in a computer game, but you don't. You're guided through it in terms of the layout of the landscape, in terms of things. This is certainly guided. This is on the rails. This is a highly controlled game in terms of managing it, capturing value, in terms of, so when they're doing all the auditions, they actually have a whole list of player profiles. And I know this because one of my neighbors we did this for the CBC, and they would go and say, yes, we found our screamer, we found our crier, we found our weird-looking person, we found in terms of doing things. And so they actually give character names to all the different players so that they can play the game and tell the story. So some takeaways. What we know is that if you get those mechanics, dynamics, and emotions right, and when you look at the Jay-Z example, and when you look at the Tipex example, and when you look at American Idol, they have them right, they're reinforcing, and they go on, then you get these powerfully engaging games where people are self-motivated to spend lots of time and lots of money partaking in something, either as an observer, either as a spectator. We also know that people can move around, so spectators can become players in some games, and players can become spectators, and observers can become spectators, and so on. One of the key things is, gamification is a relatively new term, but gamifying things has been happening all the time. All the world is a game in terms of doing, but so is entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship has been happening forever, but we've only been studying entrepreneurship for about 50 years in terms of understanding what makes a good entrepreneur, what makes an average entrepreneur, how do entrepreneurs work, how do they use their networks, how do they leverage their resources, how do they handle ambiguity. What's happening with gamification is they're saying, well, how do we can learn from the gaming industry to get those sort of reactions? And it revolves around these 3 building blocks or elements of a gamified process, which is understanding the mechanics, understanding the dynamics, and understanding the emotions in terms of the things that you're aspiring to get. And there's not a lot out there in terms of, not a lot of research out there at the moment, and our work is sort of, hopefully going to be helping to shape that. Why gamify? You shouldn't gamify everything. You shouldn't gamify every process. And when you look, and so when I was doing this talk, I was contacted by two alumni. Richard Brett, I don't know if Richard's here tonight, but he was telling me about something he did several years ago in terms of a points engine for an enterprise software system that he was doing, and he'd been thinking about it, and it had badges and leaders and everything else. And then Ali Reza Beku from SAP, he was talking about the project he's currently working on where they're using gamification principles for training how to sell their mobile technologies that they have. And so they have a whole gaming platform based on trying to train their global sales team to sell their mobile technologies they have for their enterprise software in terms of doing things. And so it's not to be taken lightly, but it is something which has been going on for a long time, and we're learning how to actually do it. Whereas in the same way as we've been learning how entrepreneurs are entrepreneurial, even though they've been doing it long before business schools existed, we're trying to distill the practices. Be wary that people game the game. So is gaming the game a good thing? For those of you who did my class, what would be my answer? It depends. Okay, it depends. Okay, gaming the game in terms of American Idol has been great. All the controversy, all the news, and getting people engaged, building it allows it to innovate it forward. But if it becomes bigger than the game, if it distorts the game, if it harms the game in terms of, people win who don't win and people lose confidence in it, then it can be bad. So understand that people will game games. Okay. And how they game them can be valuable in some cases and can be damaging in other instances in terms of going forward. Rewards are not enough. This is all about intrinsic motivation. It's not enough. It's the playing and the progress that makes the experience and fun. For those of you who have played, lots of computer games, what were your extrinsic rewards for doing it? You got a certain shield or a certain badge. But you mostly did it, you mostly spent hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands of hours doing it because it was fun and it was pleasurable in terms of how it worked. Think about the life cycle of the game. So when you look at the Jay-Z game, it had an end game, which is the book launch. It wasn't replayable. It wasn't meant to be replayable. It was a one-off game. So think about the life cycle of the games. This is a game which is going to go on forever, or is it a one-off? What is the end game going to look like? What does the end game feel like in terms of winnings, in terms of status, in terms of outcome? If it is replayable, how will it evolve over time? How will you keep it fresh? And remember, you're not designing a game. You're designing a business process. You're designing a business process by learning about principles from gamification. So you're trying to think about, it's a design lens. That's exactly what it's a design lens. which draws upon IT, it draws upon psychology, draws upon behavioral economics. It applies to marketing, it applies to operations, it applies to advertising, it applies to health. It also links to the work on nudging, nudging economics, how you nudge people to do things in terms of rewarding. But you're not making a game, you're trying to gamify a process by learning from game domains in the gaming industry. There you go.